But Islam is tolerant of other religions. Religious minorities have flourished under Islam. Muslims are commanded to protect Jews and Christians, the people of the book, and to do them no harm. The Quran says in Surah 109, "To you, your religion. To me, mine."
But reality shows us that it's not true. Religious minorities have not flourished under Islam at all. In fact, they have dwindled to mere shadows after centuries of persecution and discrimination. Some were converted from their native religion by brute force, others under the agonizing strain of dhimmitude. What Muslims call tolerance, others correctly identify as institutionalized discrimination. The consignment of Jews and Christians to dhimmis under Islamic rule means that they are not allowed the same rights and freedoms as Muslims. They cannot share their faith or build houses of worship without permission. Historically, dhimmis have often had to wear distinguishing clothing or cut their hair in a particular manner that indicates their position of inferiority and humiliation. They do not share the same legal rights as Muslims and must even pay a poll tax, the jizya. They are to be killed or have their children taken from them if they cannot satisfy the tax collector's requirements. For hundreds of years, the relative Christian population in occupied Europe had their sons taken away and forcibly converted into Muslim warriors, known as Janissaries, by the Ottoman Turks. It is under this burden of discrimination and third-class status that so many converted to Islam over the centuries. Those who didn't often faced economic and social hardships that persist to this day and are appalling by Western standards of true religious tolerance and pluralism. For those who are not the people of the book, such as Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and atheists, there is very little tolerance to be found once Islam establishes political superiority. The Quran tells Muslims to, quote, "fight in the way of Allah until religion is only for Allah." The conquered populations face death if they do not establish regular prayer and charity in the Islamic tradition. Islamists in Somalia behead Christians. In Iran, they are jailed. One of the great ironies of Islam is that non-Muslims are to be treated according to the very standards by which Muslims themselves would claim the right to violent self-defense were the shoe on the other foot. Islam is its own justification. Most Muslims therefore feel no need to question the ingrained arrogance and double standards. At best, this religion of peace has a dual personality toward other religions. In some places they are explicitly cursed by Allah. There are about 500 verses in the Quran that speak of Allah's hatred for non-Muslims and the punishment that He has prepared for their unbelief. There is also a tiny handful that say otherwise, but these are mostly earlier verses that many scholars consider to be abrogated by the later, more violent ones. As for Surah 109, any true Quran scholar will point out that the purpose of the verse was to distinguish Islam from the stone gods of the Quraysh, of which one was named Allah, rather than to advocate religious tolerance for non-Muslims. Nearly every Mid-East country, except Israel, has laws forbidding Bibles to be brought in. Interestingly, the Bible tells us Abraham was instructed by God Almighty to leave the land of Ur, which was in fact where many stone gods were made. Allah is simply just a pagan idol that Muhammad chose for his own religion. At the time that he narrated this very early verse, Muhammad did not have any power, and thus no choice, but to be tolerant of others. By contrast, there was no true tolerance shown when he returned to Mecca with power many years later and demanded that anyone who would not convert to Islam be evicted from the city or put to the sword. Surah chapter 9. If tolerance simply means discouraging the mass slaughter of those of a different faith, then today's Islam generally meets this standard more often than not. But if tolerance means allowing people of other faiths the same religious liberties that Muslims enjoy, then Islam is fundamentally the most intolerant religion under the sun. Friend, I'm not anti-Islam. I'm not anti-anything. I'm simply for truth and against error.
You infidel. Didn't you know that the Islamic religion fostered a rich heritage of scientific discovery, paving the way for modern advances in technology and medicine? I mean the period between the 7th and 13th centuries, when Europe was experiencing its dark ages and the Muslim world was conquering new populations and culture.
Although there is no arguing that the Muslim world was more advanced during this period than the Christian world, the reasons for this have absolutely nothing to do with the Islamic religion, other than its mandate for military expansion. In fact, the religion actively discourages knowledge outside of itself, which is why the most prolific Muslim scholars throughout history tend to be students of religion rather than science. There are 4 basic reasons why Islam has little true claim to scientific achievement. First, the Muslim world benefited greatly from the Greek sciences, which were translated for them by Christians and Jews. To their credit, Muslims did a better job of preserving Greek texts than did the Europeans of the time, and this became the foundation for their own knowledge. One large reason for this, however, was that access by Christians to this part of their world was cut off by Muslim slave ships and coastal raids that dominated the Mediterranean during this period. Secondly, many of the scientific advances credited to Islam were actually borrowed from other cultures conquered by the Muslims. The algebraic concept of zero, for example, is erroneously attributed to Islam, but it was in fact a Hindu discovery that was merely introduced to the West by Muslims. In fact, conquered populations contributed greatly to the history of Muslim science until gradually being decimated by conversion to Islam, under the pressures of Nimrud. The Muslim concentration within a population is directly proportional to the decline of scientific achievement. It is no accident that the Muslim world has had little to show for itself in the last 600 years or so, since running out of new civilizations to cannibalize. Third, even the great Muslim scientists and icons were often considered heretics in their time, sometimes for good reason. One of the greatest achievers to come out of the Muslim world was the Persian scientist and philosopher, Al-Razi. His impressive works are often held up today as proof of Muslim accomplishment. But what the apologists often leave out is that Al-Razi was denounced as a blasphemer, since he followed his own religious beliefs, which were in obvious contradiction to traditional Islam. Fourth, even the contributions that are attributed to Islam, often inaccurately, are not terribly dramatic. There is the invention of certain words, such as alchemy and elixir, but not much else that survives in modern technology that is of any practical significance. Neither is there any reason to believe that such discoveries would not have easily been made by the West following the cultural awakening triggered by the Reformation. As an example of this, consider that Muslims claim credit for coffee, since the beans were discovered in Africa, at the time, an important venue for Islamic slave trading, and first processed in the Middle East. While this is true, it is also true that the red dye used in many food products, from cranberry juice to candy, comes from the abdomen of a particular female beetle found in South America. It is extremely unlikely that the West would not have stumbled across coffee by now, although to be fair, coffee probably expedited subsequent discoveries. In fact, the litany of Muslim achievement often takes the form of rhapsody, in which the true origins of these discoveries are omitted, along with their comparative significance to Western achievement. However, scientific, medical, and technological accomplishments are not something over which Muslim apologists want to get into a rigorous contest with the Christian world. Today's Islamic innovators are primarily known for turning Western technology such as cell phones and automobiles into instruments of mass murder. To sum up, although the Islamic religion is not entirely hostile to science, neither should it be confused as a facilitator. The great achievements that are said to have come out of the Islamic world were made either by non-Muslims who happened to be under Islamic rule, or by heretics, who usually had little interest in Islam. Scientific discovery tapers off dramatically as Islam asserts dominance, until it eventually peters out altogether. But I tell you this. If Hitler hadn't killed off those 6 million Jews and Christians during World War II, I'm sure we'd be ahead a lot more in the arts and technology right now. Because I found that Jews have turned to be incredibly intelligent and smart people. I believe it's all part of God's everlasting blessing on them.